Welcome back to our podcast. I'm the gentleman, accompanied by the disturbed Southern Belle.
Hello.
I will be your host for this episode, where we will be discussing lesser known stories of the Norse gods. Our first story is the origin of Sleipnir, which I know some of you might recognize as Odin's eight-legged steed from the first Marvel's Thor movie.
So, eight-legged steed means it's got 8 legs. An 8-legged horse is basically what you're saying.
Yep, actually, most depictions have it to where it's got 4 legs, but around the knee it actually splits into 2.
That's
So it's more
interesting.
like 8-footed horse, I guess.
Well, interesting.
So Sleipnir's story is kind of odd, although if you're familiar at all with the Norse gods, it won't be all that surprising how weird it is. So the story starts before the creation of Asgard, the home of the Scandinavian gods.
So, Asgard is kind of like Mount Olympus for the other gods, like Zeus and them.
It is pretty much, except some depictions have it as literally just this giant floating fortress.
Okay.
So, unlike Mount Olympus, it's actually completely in the air, not just on a mountain.
Right. Okay. So, that is where the gods lived, and Sleipnir came before this was created.
Yep.
All right.
Also, it's pretty much just an entirely different realm or dimension. So,
Right.
so these gods wanted a castle in the skies above mortals, and they needed the help of a craftsman. In this case, it was a giant, one of the best craftsmen known at that time. And in order to get his help, they struck a deal with the giant to where if he were to finish the castle within 3 winters or 3 years, the gods would give him the sun, the moon, and Freya, the goddess of love. And seeing the giant work, they saw him using a magical horse whose name was Svadilfari to carry materials into the sky, and they didn't like this because it meant that the giant would finish sooner than they had anticipated, and he would beat the deadline.
So, I'm guessing this is something that they were going to try to stop in some way.
Yeah, they really did not want to lose Freya, well, the sun of the moon either, but I think Freya would have been the biggest loss there.
Right. So they basically just made this deal but they never really thought he could do it.
No, they really did not expect him to finish in time.
Right. Okay.
So, not liking the progress that the giant was making, the gods had hatched a plan to sabotage him. They got Loki to transform into this beautiful mare in order to distract Svadilfari. And while distracting the horse, Loki had led him into the forest where Svadilfari had managed to impregnate the Trickster God, leading to the birth of Odin's eight-legged steed, Sleipnir.
Okay. So basically what you're saying is Loki turned into a female horse in order to seduce the giant's horse. He led him off into the forest, had sex with him, and that's how Sleipnir came about.
Yep, pretty much.
Hmm.
One thing I'm not entirely sure about, though, is what was the size of Svadilfari? It was a giant horse.
Right. That is a question. Very much so. So, yeah, that is definitely something that is a head scratcher. I would assume it would be big enough he could ride it. So, yeah, it would have to be very large, you would think. That's interesting, to say the least.
So, our second story for the day will focus on the tale of Andivari's cursed ring and how Loki essentially killed a man's son and doomed the rest of the man's family to ruin. So, our story begins with Odin and Loki traveling through the land of men, or Midgard, when Loki saw an otter who had caught a fish in a river near a waterfall. And Loki had taken up a stone and decided to kill the otter for food, their supper at night. And with one stone, he struck it dead and scored both the fish and the otter. So while Loki was gathering his kill, he began boasting to Odin about his skill and how it was pure talent that he had struck and killed two creatures with one stone. Kind of reminds me of the two birds, one stone saying.
Okay, so we've got Odin and Loki sees this otter with a fish, and then he kills the otter with the stone, and he's basically then bragging because he was able to get the fish and the otter with just one stone, right? Is that where
Yep,
we are so far? All
pretty
right.
much.
Okay.
As the two gods had continued their journey, the sun had begun to fall and night was soon approaching, and they decided to seek shelter at a farmhouse that they ran across. So, upon announcing their arrival, a man entered the door and said his name was Hreidmar, and the two gods had offered the otter pelt for the otter and the fish for payment for lodgings for the night. So, upon talking with the gods for a while, Hreidmar had agreed to let them stay in return for the otter and fish. So once Loki and Odin had sat down, the man and his two sons, who were introduced as Regin and Fafnir, bound the two gods and put blades to their throats.
So basically, Odin and Loki, they had killed this otter, or Loki had killed this otter, and then they travel on, and it's starting to get dark. So they come up on this house. They go in. This guy invites them in, and they say that they'll pay by giving him the otter and the fish or whatever. So they take him in. They take him in, and then he has two sons, and they manage to tie them up. How do they do that?
No idea. The story does not say. I'm assuming they just caught him by surprise, and the gods had had their weapons put down.
Oh, okay. So they had taken the god's weapons. Oh, got it. Got it. Got it. Okay.
So once the man and his sons had the gods bound and more or less incapacitated, Kragmar revealed himself as a master of magic.
Okay, so he's like a wizard or something then,
He
sort of.
is a wizard.
Okay, so he is a master of magic and I'm assuming can do all kinds of things, basically.
From what I can tell just from that one story, his main thing, along with his sons, is he can shapeshift.
Oh, well, that's interesting. So I guess that's gonna come into play at some point.
Very much so.
Okay. All right.
So once Rydmar had revealed himself and his sons, he essentially just told the story of his son, his third son, and how he would transform into an otter and go fish in a river nearby under a waterfall.
So I guess it's safe to assume that they've killed this man's son
Yep,
by mistake. I mean, they didn't know that it was a person shapeshifted into an otter. They thought they were killing an otter, correct?
yeah, they had no idea.
Okay. So they went to his house then, even, and offered,
Yep,
oh my God, his dead son to him. That's kind of whack. But go ahead.
yep. Alright, so after all that, Hreidmar had told the gods of his third son, like I said, whose name was Otter.
Oh my goodness.
Yep. The gods had killed an otter who was Otter.
Well, that is unexpected. I didn't expect his name to actually be Otter. That's kind of funny.
Yep. So once Hreidmar had told the gods that they had murdered his son, Otter, he had then demanded ransom for the gods' freedom. Honestly, don't understand why. I think he should just kill them immediately, but eh. So once Hreidmar had made his demands, Odin and Loki made a binding oath that they would pay for with whatever Hreidmar had demanded.
Do they actually know his demands yet? Or are they just saying, we'll do whatever you want, no matter what it is, we don't even care?
They will be saying we will do whatever you want without knowing.
Okay, so they don't know what the demands are. They're just saying we'll do it, and they don't know if it's something that they should be actually saying yes to yet.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So after they had agreed, Hreidmar then skinned the otter, which is Otter, and demanded that the gods fill his pelt with gold.
Doesn't really seem like much of a demand. And plus, he skinned his own son
He skinned his own son.
just so that they could fill the pelt with. How much gold could an otter pelt even hold? Otters aren't even that big, are they?
No.
That
Apparently, these Norse or Scandinavian otters are huge because this causes a bit of trouble later on.
Oh, so they're not like normal otters that we would know today. Okay, got it.
I would assume not.
Well, I guess that makes a little more sense in the fact that I guess he's getting more gold, but still, he skinned his son. That is an interesting twist that I was not expecting at all.
Nope, neither was I when I first heard this story. So, after the demand was made, Loki was the one to agree, and normally I would say that I don't think they should trust him here, but he does follow through, surprisingly enough.
Funny that they keep choosing Loki to be the one that even does these tasks and these different stories, considering he's supposed to be like a trickster and not to be trusted. So it's kind of strange that he keeps popping up and being the one, like he was the one who turned into the mayor in the other story we read about Sleipnir. So that's kind of weird too that they keep picking him as the one to go get. Well, I guess he's the one that gets things done. I mean, he doesn't care. He'll even turn into a mayor. So he's the man to go to, I guess.
Apparently so. Once Loki had agreed to go out and fill the otter pelt, which is still pretty messed up, he ran to Svartalfheim, the land of the dwarves, and met with or found a dwarf named Andivari. So Loki had found Andivari lounging in a pool in the shape of a fish. Well, Andivari was in the shape of a fish.
Okay, so the dwarf is actually shapeshifted into a fish and he finds him basically.
Yep, pretty much.
All right. Okay.
Although this does raise one question.
Mhm.
How was he able to identify the fish as a dwarf, but not otter
But not
as
the
otter?
otter. That is a good question. I'm not sure unless he had some kind of distinctive markings or something maybe that was just odd. I mean, I don't know. That does make you wonder. I'm not sure.
So, seeing Andivari in the shape of a fish, he was completely unaware of Loki's presence. And so, that gave Loki the perfect chance to catch him in a fishing net.
So Andabari is just chilling in this pool, he's shaped like a fish. He's shape shifted into the fish. Loki comes up on him. He doesn't know he's around, and he's like, "Aha!" And so he decides to catch him in a net. For what purpose?
He actually is going to rob the dwarf, pretty much.
Okay, so that makes sense.
So after Loki had caught Andivari, Andivari then shifted back into his dwarf shape. The whole reason Loki had decided to seek out the dwarves is because he just didn't want to use his own gold for this, because the gods are greedy. Pretty sure everyone knows that at this point. So after Loki had captured Andivari, he pretty much just held him captive until the dwarf decided to help him. Once the dwarf decided to help, he led Loki back to his cave where he had all his treasures and stuff stashed and began filling the otter pelt, which the dwarves, from what I remember, are supposed to be rich, pretty much. Very, very wealthy. So I'm not entirely sure how that much money would fit in an otter pelt, although I guess it'll kind of make sense, I guess, but considering Loki clears out the dwarf of everything, it doesn't entirely make sense.
Okay, so I could I could kind of assume that maybe the reason the dwarfs are so rich it would be similar to like the hobbits, like they were mining this gold and stuff. Maybe that's where some of this money came from.
That and they're like these master craftsmen that pretty much everyone goes to build stuff.
Right. So, I mean, then they get paid for that as well. So, yeah, so we can see where they're probably getting the money. I guess my question would be, how strong is Loki? Because, I mean, if this otter pelt is huge and it's filled with gold and whatever, how's he moving it
He
without
is
it ripping apart? Or you would think.
based off of like depictions of Loki, pictures and stuff.
Right.
He's not big
No.
by any stretch. Like you see Thor, how
Mm-hmm.
he's just fat, more or less.
Right.
Loki is the complete opposite.
Right.
Loki is the definition of skin and bones.
Hmm.
He has, when you look at his picture or drawings of him, he looks like he is just skin on top of bones. He doesn't look like he has any muscle mass
Right.
whatsoever.
But I guess he's supposed to have God strength, I suppose. I mean, we don't look at him as like a physical person, but still, that does look like that would be very difficult to move just in general, keeping the gold in it. And I don't, it just seems like it would be a pain in the butt, basically.
It does. It really does. And so once Loki and Andivari had pretty much filled the otter pelt, Loki had seen that even after all the stuff was cleared out, Andivari was hiding a ring. The stories I've read didn't actually specify what kind of ring, just assuming it was gold. So, anyways, Loki then demanded that the ring be placed on or in the pelt with the other gold and treasures.
Definitely the definition of a greedy god. So he's basically stolen everything this person has, this dwarf. He's stolen everything. And he sees this one little ring and he's got to have that too.
Yep, pretty much. Which actually, it's kind of more greedy when you think about it this way. Andivari had told Loki that as long as he had kept the ring, he could become rich again. Andivari could have replenished his wealth completely, if not more so.
So Loki taking this took that away. So he's just kind of being cruel as well.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's weird. But okay.
So, as punishment for Loki's greed, Andivari had placed a curse on the ring and told Loki that whoever held the ring, whoever had possession of it, would face nothing but ruin. Even knowing of the curse, Loki still took the ring anyways, because it's not like he was going to keep it. It's going to the man who had held him and Odin hostage. So I guess it might have been justified in his eyes.
So basically, then I guess it wasn't so much maybe cruelty, then is he wanted to be cruel to the person who had kidnapped them, more or less. Even though they killed his son, he still felt like he was in the right, basically.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. All right. Understood.
And upon all of that happening, Loki then returned back to Hreidmar's house and showed the ring to Odin. However, he withheld information of the curse, and Odin, being just another greedy god, decided that the ring looked fair, and so he took it for himself. So after Loki returned and showed the ring to Odin, he presented the otter pelt full of treasures to Hreidmar and his sons, who actually ended up twisting the deal and said that the pelt needed to be filled and covered in gold completely.
So, how does one cover a pelt with gold? Is it talking about like dust or actually putting gold coins and covering it where you can't see it?
Actually putting gold coins over it and covering it completely.
Oh, okay.
So after the deal had been changed, they covered and filled the otter pelt with gold, and somehow they had just enough. But Hreidmar saw one fur that was not covered.
So one hair.
One hair.
Okay.
So after all of that, Odin had begrudgingly decided to give the ring. So he placed the ring over that one hair, and the deal was complete. So after the deal was complete, Freidmar and his remaining two sons freed Odin, and Odin and Loki ran off without saying a word of the curse on the ring, thus dooming Freidmar and his two sons.
So then I guess they're doomed to ruin and never prospering in life. It does seem kind of weird that it would go over to the sons as well. I mean, it looks like only one person could own the ring, and whoever possessed it would be the one, but I guess it could overflow to the children as well. But that is a very interesting story. Some definite twists and turns, and I'm not really sure who's the villain here because the main guy even went so far as to skin his own son just so he could fill his skin with gold.
Mm,
So that's kind of not what I would say a dad of the year out there, but I guess you got to do what you got to do.
yep, guess so. The only two I know aren't in the wrong in this story are the dwarf and Odin.
Yeah, because Odin supposedly didn't even know the ring was cursed. He just locked it. And
And
Loki didn't tell him, so
and the dwarf just wanted to punish Loki for stealing his treasures.
which you can't blame him there because it was ridiculous. And he didn't have to steal the ring. He could have stolen everything else and at least left him the ring. So yeah. Well, that's an interesting one. I don't think I've ever heard that one before. How about y'all? Have y'all ever heard this one? We'd love to hear your comments about it in the below or whatever. So leave us a comment and let us know if you've heard this one or what you think about this dad who skins his own son so he can use the pelt to be filled with gold.
For our next story, we will cover the giantess and goddess Skadi. So Skadi is the goddess of hunting and the embodiment of winter. And since she would be considered one of the major goddesses, I guess, one of the ones that have the biggest impact on the world. There are many stories of this goddess, but the one I wish to share with you today is the story of how a giantess actually became a goddess. So this whole story started when her father, a giant named Thiazi, had kidnapped the goddess of youth, Ethan, which is actually spelt Eden, Idunn. So many of you would probably recognize that name just from the 2016 God of War that came out. But back to our story, Thiazi, once Ethan had been recovered safely, Thiazi had been put to death for his crime.
So does it say why he kidnapped her to start with?
I've actually had trouble finding that. I'm assuming just for a wife. I don't think he
Okay.
was married at the
So it
time.
didn't actually just specify. So he just saw her, took her, and then they got her back and killed him.
Yep.
All right.
So after Thiazi had been put to death, the giantess Skadi had set on a path of war for revenge against the Aesir, the gods.
Okay. So which gods is who's she mad at?
I'm assuming every single one. It didn't really specify, so
So she just blames all the gods for her father's death, basically.
I'm assuming so. I
Does it
mean,
ever say who actually killed him?
I
Or
think Odin was the one that actually killed him. I'm not 100% sure on that.
okay, got it.
So somehow the gods had been, I guess, in a good mood, and Odin had no desire for any further bloodshed, which is strange, just because he is a kind of war focused god, I guess. He was always the one in the front lines, so to speak. So the gods actually offered her a place among them, place as a goddess. And she didn't want that. Her she would rather have just stayed the way she was, I guess. I don't really
So
No, for
they
100%.
Okay, so they basically said, "Hey, if you'll stop this, you can be a goddess." More or
Yeah,
less, is that what they
that's what I think. Yeah.
but she had no interest in being a goddess. She just wanted to
No,
be a person or a giantess or whatever she was.
yeah, but in the end, she agreed. But the only stipulation, the one thing she wanted in return was a husband.
Okay.
So once this had been agreed on, she was actually made to choose by the god's feet. Every god would remain hidden, and she would only be able to see their feet, and that's how she would have to choose who her husband would be.
Well, that is definitely an interesting body part to use to choose a spouse. So they what, like stood behind a curtain with just their feet showing and she just went by and looked at their feet and whoever's feet she liked, that's who she married.
Pretty much.
That well, I guess that's one way of doing it. But
I
very
think they
interesting.
just wanted to make a game out of it or something.
Maybe that's it.
So she'd actually wanted to marry Baldur, the god of light and beauty. However, after choosing the fate that she found most attractive, she ended up choosing Njord, the god of the sea.
So I would assume she would probably be looking at Baldur because she probably found him more attractive then, but Nord's feet were more attractive.
I guess so.
So yeah, that is very weird. I'm sorry, but that is a very weird way to pick a spouse just randomly by their feet, especially your feet, because the feet are not something that you would really even be focusing on that much. You think it would be the face or I don't know, something else, but okay, anyway.
So after she'd made her choice, she was actually unsatisfied for obvious reasons. She didn't get the god of beauty, I guess.
So is Nerd like ugly?
I don't know. I hadn't found any pictures of him, and I never really thought to look into that.
Hmm. Well, okay.
So, unsatisfied with her choice, she decided to add one more condition. The gods had to make her laugh.
What is it with these people always changing the deal after it's already been made? Because we saw that in the last story where they wanted more gold, and now she's changing the deal again.
Yeah, it is a very common theme in these stories.
That is kind of weird that the gods are so flexible,
Untrustworthy?
and flexible for that matter, that they actually give them the ability to add a condition.
Yeah,
I mean, that's kind of weird because you would think once it was the deal was struck, that would be the deal, and that's it. But
I guess they just decided to go with it, not wanting any more issues and wanting her to
right,
be happy.
sort of the choose your battle kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. Okay.
And they actually had trouble with this. None of the gods could make her laugh until, go figure, Loki's turn.
Of course, it's Loki. It's always Loki. Loki is the man that gets things done.
Apparently so. So this is where the story kind of gets off the walls. And this is way crazier than a woman picking her husband by their feet. This is just weird. So Loki, the genius that he is, tied one end of a rope to his testicles and tied the other one to the horns of a goat. Every time the goat would jump, he would howl in pain. And after it gotten to be too much, he fell over into the giantess's lap. And then she laughed.
Well, that is an interesting sense of humor, to say the least. So he ties a rope to his nether region, we'll say, and then to the horns of a goat. The goat's jerking the rope, I'm assuming, and I can't say from personal experience, but I would assume that would not be too comfortable. And because that's hurting him, that's what ends up making her laugh.
Presumably so, yeah.
Well, that is interesting.
Trust Loki to come up with the most off the wall and most,
Ridiculous plan, yes.
yeah,
That that would not been my go-to.
and for it to work.
I can't imagine many men being their go-to to do this because this does not sound pleasurable in the least.
Very painful.
I guess it is what it is.
So that brings us to the end of this episode, and we appreciate you listening. If you have any stories or anything that you'd like me to cover, would greatly appreciate it if you left it in the comments below. And if you like these stories, don't forget to tune in next week where I will be continuing to host and continuing on with the stories.
Yeah, please come back next week where we're going to be picking up with Thor and how he got his hammer and some other interesting myths surrounding him. We don't know how we're going to stretch the episodes out right now. We're going to see how long each one is going to be, but definitely it's going to cover Thor. And we'd absolutely love to have you back next week. Leave us a comment if there's any other mythology that you're interested in or any other myths in the Norse pantheon that you would love for us to cover. We'd be happy to look into it. And as always, don't forget to
Stay
stay
disturbed.
disturbed.